Welcome to the Gavel. I'm Terry Ikumi. Here's what Parliament was up to this past week. The National Assembly has re-amended the Electoral Act Amendment Bill to include provisions which clearly define the mode of primaries for political parties. Both chambers harmonized and passed the version of the bill which now includes direct, indirect, and consensus methods for political parties to nominate candidates for electoral positions. Now, Tuesday's amendment to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill was done to harmonize the position of the Senate and the House of Representatives on the issue of consensus method of conducting primaries. Federal legislators in the Senate and House of Representatives once again fine-tuned the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, specifically Clause 84, which relates to the method of party primaries to nominate candidates for elective positions. President Buhari had refused to give his assent to the bill, faulting the National Assembly's inclusion of mandatory direct primaries for political parties. But last week, the National Assembly rescinded its earlier position on compulsory direct primaries and included indirect and consensus methods as options. However, the House of Representatives, which did not include the option of consensus method, is again reversing itself and now supports the consensus method, but with some conditions. These conditions are spelled out in the harmonized version of the bill, which was before the House of Representatives during Tuesday's plenary.
I think the House and the Senate have decided to add, I believe, the consensus provision so that there will be no need for conference, but with certain provisos. And those provisos, hopefully, we'll be able to agree and insert them today to protect all aspirants for all positions so that we'll all have an even playing field.
As regards consensus candidates, the amended bill provides in Clause 84, subsection 9, that a political party that adopts a consensus candidate shall secure the written consent of all cleared aspirants for the position, indicating their voluntary withdrawal from the race and their endorsement of the consensus candidates. Where a political party is unable to secure the written consent of all cleared aspirants for the purpose of a consensus candidate, it shall revert to the choice of direct or indirect primaries for the nomination of candidates for the aforesaid elective positions. Another section of the bill reads, "A special convention or nomination congress shall be held to ratify the choice of consensus candidates at designated centers at the national, state, senatorial, federal, and state constituencies as the case may be." The harmonized version of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill was also before the Senate for passage.
For the consensus, the two chambers have produced in this bill now very clear definition of how a consensus candidate would emerge.
The amended bill is to be sent to President Muhammadu Buhari once again for assent. Meanwhile, the Green Chamber turned rowdy last Wednesday after members learned that the Senate had included the consensus option of party primaries in the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. It was the decision of the House at the time to stick strictly with the provisions of the President's letter, indicating only the direct and indirect methods of party primaries. Fast forward a week later, and lawmakers in the Green Chamber have had a change of heart.
Having wider consultations, we realized that majority of the people wanted consensus included, and being a house that listens to the pulse of the people, we felt, okay, if we were going to include it, it would have to be defined, which was why there was a definition for consensus, definition for direct primaries, and definition for indirect primaries. So I think with that, I think everybody is happy now.
The House is rescinding its decision because we want the bill to be able to move ahead. We want the President to sign it so that Electoral Act is not delayed. The whole country is looking forward to the Electoral Act, and anything that we delay it, nobody's happy about it. So this decision that was taken, we believe it will make it easier for the Electoral Act to come out, because we need it to ensure that elections are free and fair. I guess that is the guiding principle of the House.
What we have done was to weigh our options with regards to the benefits that is in this Electoral Act over the inclusion or non-inclusion of the consensus as option, the consensus option. And we saw that including it, but putting a condition with regards to how consensus should be defined or applied was the best thing for Nigerians. And we didn't want to go through another rough part that would delay the communication of this piece of legislation to Mr. President for his assent, seeing that time is of the essence. So that was why we went this route, and with the precondition that we have put in there, I think it's healthy for our democracy, which is very important.
With this amendment, lawmakers believe that political godfathers can no longer sit in their rooms and decide on a consensus candidate. Rather, that decision would have to be made by the candidate cleared for that particular position. All eyes now turn to the president for assent or veto, considering that the option of consensus was not initially contained in his letter of refusal to the National Assembly. However, a member of the coalition of civil society organizations who had commended the Green Chamber for ignoring the consensus option appears disappointed, even with a clause which makes it compulsory that a written statement approving the consensus candidate must be obtained from all aspirants of a position by the political party.
The challenge with that procedure is you are stripping, members of political parties with the opportunity to elect, candidates of their choice. And practice have shown that most political parties, don't adopt and uphold certain principles even in consensus making.
Now, the fuel subsidy issue has lingered for too long. Many Nigerians would agree. To stay or go? That's the recurring question. Well, for now it stays, according to the Minister of State for Petroleum after a meeting with the President of the Senate. The Minister of Finance was also at that meeting. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has set up 2 ad hoc committees, one to investigate the state of the country's refineries and another to ascertain the actual daily consumption of PMS in the country. Take a listen. President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, is aware of the gravity of his remarks on the removal of petroleum subsidy, as well as the ripples it has caused, as he convened a meeting with petroleum industry players to discuss the way forward on the sensitive issue of the removal of fuel subsidy.
This meeting, as far as we are concerned, is going to go on. After this one, there could be another one, all in search of ways and means of ensuring that ordinary Nigerian does not suffer any hardship. Now I'm taking this opportunity to appeal to TUC and LSC to shelve this plan to go on strike or demonstration. Is totally unnecessary. There is not going to be removal of subsidy, so there is no need for this.
Fiscal framework.
The Minister of Finance explained that provision was made for the payment of petroleum subsidy in the 2022 budget to only cover the period of January till June 2022. However, she said present economic realities necessitate another approach to the subsidy matter.
After the budget was passed and we have had consultations with a number of stakeholders, it became clear that the timing is problematic, that practically there is still heightened inflation, and also removal of subsidy will further worsen the situation, thereby imposing more difficulties on the citizens. And Mr. President clearly does not want to do that. As we're discussing right now within the executive the possibility of amending the budget, we may need to come back to the National Assembly by way of amendment to make additional provision for fuel subsidy from July 2022 going forward, or whatever period is agreed is the right timing.
The Minister of State for Petroleum was emphatic in his stand that subsidy removal should be shelved for now.
It is very clear. It is clear to the blind and audible to the deaf that it is not possible at this time for us to remove the subsidy. We know that some naysayers, some political people will try to make political capital out of it, but it is not within the contemplation now of this administration to remove subsidy. But of course, if there are legislative enablers that will also ensure that it is within the law, then I think it's a legislative responsibility, and that's why we are very much in the right place to be discussing this matter today.
The National Assembly passed the Petroleum Industry Bill in 2021, and President Muhammadu Buhari signed it into law on August 16, 2021, signaling the government's resolve to deregulate the petroleum industry and remove fuel subsidy. Regardless of the reasons for stalling the removal of fuel subsidy, be it economic or political, this matter will simply not fade away until a permanent solution is found once and for all. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives is concerned about the state of the refineries and daily rate of consumption of PMS in the country.
The House is concerned about the huge sums of money being paid as subsidies and the controversies it has been generating. The House is worried that it may not be possible to ascertain the actual sums of subsidy required and being paid without accurate data of the daily consumption of premium motor spirit in Nigeria, in bracket PMS. The House acknowledges that when such data is generated, it will enhance effective planning, supply and distribution of the said product to Nigerians.
It's important that we find out, we do a thorough investigation to determine exactly how much PMS is consumed in Nigeria per day. Nobody has a figure, and we need to figure out exactly what we're consuming in Nigeria. It's only after you figure out what is consumed that you can even begin to talk about whether you should have full subsidy or not. That's number one. Number two, we need to also investigate thoroughly the state of our 4 refineries, the state of repair or disrepair, and what exactly it will cost to have them functional.
The House is also calling for the establishment of industries across the country.
The House is cognizant of the need for the comprehensive industrial revolution intervention at this point in the history of our nation. Given the recent development in the political, social, and economic spheres of the country, which emphasize the fact that youth are important stakeholders in the Nigerian project. The House is aware that the predominance of industrial clusters in the Southeast Asian countries has motivated industrial growth in the form of gross domestic product, GDP, and massive decline in unemployment, making stability in the country, in the economy, political, and leadership, and lower crime rate as a result of their remarkable success in industrialization. The House is also aware that similar strategy of building cottage industries has worked agreeable in some African countries like Rwanda, Mozambique, Ghana, and South Africa, an indication that grassroots industrialization produces an array of positive economic and social impacts. The House is therefore worried that Nigeria is yet to positively harness the human capital resources accruing from its youthful population through the creation of industrial clusters to engage the youth.
Welcome back to the Gavel. Our next report looks at the National Emergency Health Bill of the Senate, quite similar to the Infectious Diseases Bill passed late last year by the House of Representatives, as well as the call by the House for the investigation of the Southeastern security outfit, Ebubeagwu, and more. Take a listen.
More than 2 years after COVID-19 hit the world, Nigeria still does not have a comprehensive legislative framework to manage the outbreak of an epidemic, a pandemic, or any infectious disease. In the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Senate and House of Representatives introduced legislations to manage infectious diseases, but the bills lingered for months in the National Assembly until the House of Representatives finally passed theirs on December 21, 2020. The National Health Emergency Bill was before the Senate on Tuesday for third reading during Wednesday's plenary session. The bill is expected to provide for an effective legal and administrative machinery to address challenges posed by sudden outbreak of infectious diseases which endangers public health in Nigeria.
The framework that will necessitate a declaration by the appropriate authority of a public health emergency and to provide a sound basis for the measures and actions of the appropriate authorities during the period of the public health emergencies to control and contain the spread of infectious or contagious diseases or public health events.
The National Health Emergency Bill provides for establishment of a task force upon the declaration of a public health emergency, creation of a public health emergency fund with monies appropriated by the National Assembly to fund emergency response activities, designation of isolation centers, quarantine stations, and makeshift hospitals. Meanwhile, the Senate has approved a 215.811 billion naira budget for the Federal Inland Revenue Service for 2022. The approval follows the consideration of a report by the Committee on Finance during Wednesday's plenary.
The personnel cost is based on staff strength on the payroll, including the social benefits, the NHIs, the pension contribution, and anticipated performance bonus for the year.
On the 2021 budget performance of the FIRS, the committee says the service collected 4.53 trillion naira as at October 31, 2021, out of the total projected revenue target of 7.61 trillion naira, which represents 60% achievement. The military coup in Burkina Faso caught the attention of the House of Representatives on Wednesday, and lawmakers expressed worry over the survival of democracy in West Africa.
West Africa has suffered. We are lagging behind in growth and development. You take all the development indices, the Human Development Index established by the UNDP, you find all the countries in West Africa lagging behind others. And part of the problem is the inconsistency in governance. You know, parliaments are suspended, constitutions are suspended. When they come back, they start to learn afresh. There's suffocation of civil society. People cannot speak and enjoy their basic freedoms. There's an attempt to even distort the process of growth.
I condemn completely what the military has done, but you must also look at the fact that when that happened, as opposed to what he said is the law in Ghana, where people are encouraged to come out and resist such military incursions into power, the people came out in solidarity with the military, not because they don't want democratic governance, but more because what they had was far from what they were hoping, what they would ordinarily desire.
The Green Chamber is urging the federal government, ECOWAS, the United Nations and its agencies, as well as the international community to impose total sanctions on those countries where coups d'etat have taken place in West Africa. The House of Representatives is accusing the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs of disregarding the 2022 Appropriation Act. Following a motion raised by Representative Kasimu Megari, the ministry is accused of directing Nigerian embassies to disregard a letter from the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, which drew their attention to the 2022 Appropriation Act, which allows embassies to spend monies directly appropriated for them without approval from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Buba, also pointed out the deplorable state of Nigerian embassies and the attitude of the ministry to their plight. The House is worried over the effrontery and impunity of those officials in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives has called for a meeting with the Permanent Secretary and the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
That our ambassadors sometimes hire taxis, or sometimes the vehicles break down and they have to remove the flag and hide so that the shame will be covered. We visited Washington. The cooling system in that building was not working, and we found Nigerians who have come with children to seek for consular services, removing their clothes because of heat, because it was a hot period. Just for them to get approval from the ministry has become an issue. When we went to Cameroon, where the former Chief of Defense Staff is serving, in his residence, a fence that is not up to 50 meters fell. But officers have to be sent from Abuja, pay their tickets, pay extra codes, and they will go to see it, come back to report to the ministry before approval will be given for that fence to be repaired. So the case is so bad, Mr. Speaker, and that unfortunately, after the House have done due diligence, and have imputed this clause 11, the ministry started putting resistance. And I wrote the minister, this is the letter on the 18th, I wrote the minister to try to allow this law to take its place so that it will be implemented. But on the 19th, I also wrote all the embassies to take note of this law. But on the 20th, the ministry wrote a letter to all the embassies that they should not honor the letters written by the National Assembly. They should hold on with implementing the law until they make further consultation with other agencies of government.
The House of Representatives is calling for investigation and prosecution of the Southeastern security outfit, Ebube Agu, over allegations of illegalities and unlawful possession of firearms. This follows a motion of urgent public importance raised by Representative Igariwe Enwo on the need to stop the deteriorating security situation in Ebonyi State being caused by the state government security outfit. According to the lawmaker, the group is not trained on how to use the weapons and is involved in illegalities. He accuses them of torture, jeopardizing the activities of regular security agencies, and declaring a former member of the House of Representatives, Linus Okorie, wanted.
Cognizant that the activities of the Bubago militia group is gravely interfering with and jeopardizing the operational activities of the regular security agencies such as the Nigerian Police, Civil Defense, State Security Services, and the rest of other security agencies. Mr. Speaker, we're also aware that within this week, specifically 2 days ago, they said the Bubago militia group has been hunting to arrest and possibly harm a former member of this House, Right Honorable Linus Okorie, even when he did not commit any offense. He has been declared wanted and is hiding from one place to the other. Mr. Speaker, further aware that in the past few weeks, innocent Ebonyi citizens have been attacked and some killed in cold blood by the Bubago militia. We resolved to urge as follows: urge the Inspector General of Police to investigate and prosecute all reported attacks and killings in Ebonyi State by the Bubago militia. Secondly, we urge the Office of the National Security and Intelligence to investigate the status of the authorization of the various weapons, such as pump-action guns, AK-47, and other automatic weapons, which are freely in use by the Bubago militia in Ebonyi State.
Away from the plenary to committee rooms, the House of Representatives is still battling with invited guests failing to show up for hearings. This was observed during a public hearing of the House Committee on Host Communities, drawing fury from the committee chairman.
We cannot be dragged into this kind of back and forth thing that we did last year. This year we won't take that from your company. Monday the 31st, the 31st day of this month, by 2 p.m., and it is mandatory. He has to appear in person. We won't accept any letters or whatever. He has to appear in person. And if he fails to appear in person, by the special grace of God, we will invoke the relevant sections of the law.
Well, that's the Gavel. We anticipate your feedback in our mailbox, thegavel@channelstv.com. I am Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.